A ranger vanished in 1986. I found his journal in a secret tunnel, and it explains everything. Hello, and welcome back to the Wilderness Protocol. For those of you who are new here, this channel is a space for the stories that hide in the deep woods, on the silent peaks, and in the forgotten corners of our national parks. These are the accounts that don't make it into the official brochures. The experiences that rangers and hikers whisper about around a late-night campfire, long after the tourists have gone home. I've shared many accounts with you. Stories from fellow rangers, from lost hikers, from people who went looking for solitude and found something else. But I have never shared my own. The foundational story. The reason I started this protocol in the first place. I've hesitated for years, telling myself it was too personal, too unbelievable. That putting it into words might give it a power I couldn't control. But lately the silence has felt heavier. The memories have been pushing at the door I locked them behind. And I've come to believe that some warnings need to be spoken aloud, no matter the cost. So today, I'm going to tell you what happened to me at Redwood Century National Park. I'm going to tell you about the maintenance tunnel I found under the visitor center. And I'm going to explain why its most terrifying feature wasn't what it contained, but the fact that it doesn't lead anywhere in the park at all. This is my story. And it begins, as so many strange things do, with something perfectly ordinary. Redwood Century National Park was my life. For 8 years, it was more than a job, it was my sanctuary. I'd spent my 20s chasing a forestry degree, driven by a deep, almost spiritual love for the untamed places of the world. Landing a ranger position at Redwood Century was like a dream fulfilled. The park is a colossal expanse of old-growth forest in the Pacific Northwest, a place where trees older than empires scrape the clouds, and the ground is a permanent twilight of damp earth and fallen needles. My days were a rhythm of routine and quiet satisfaction. I'd patrol the trails, check on campsites, give talks to wide-eyed tourists at the visitor center, and spend my evenings in a small, cozy cabin with a view of the Sentinel Peaks. The park was predictable. Its dangers were known. Sudden weather changes, black bears, the occasional lost hiker. We had protocols for everything. A wilderness protocol, you could say. It was a system built on the belief that we understood the land we were charged with protecting. I was wrong. The visitor center itself was a product of the 1970s. A large, A-frame building of dark wood and river stone, designed to look rustic and blend in with the landscape. It housed the main offices, a small museum with taxidermied animals, a gift shop, and, in the back, the staff break room and utility closets. Below it all was a basement, a concrete labyrinth of storage rooms, the furnace, and the main water and electrical junctions for the building. No one liked the basement. It was always cold, even in the height of summer, and the air was thick with the smells of damp concrete and dust. Fluorescent lights hummed and flickered overhead, casting long, distorted shadows that played tricks on your eyes. We only went down there when we had to. The incident that changed everything happened on a miserably wet Tuesday in late October. A storm had been lashing the park for 2 days straight, turning the trails to mud and keeping visitors away. The park was empty, quiet save for the drumming of rain on the roof. I was in the main office, catching up on paperwork, when my supervisor, a gruff but decent man named Frank, called me over. "Alex," he said, pointing a thumb towards the floor. "Smell that?" I sniffed the air. Underneath the scent of wet pine from our boots, there was something else. A musty, stagnant odor. The smell of old, trapped water. "Basement?" I asked. Frank nodded. "Think a pipe burst in the south storage room. It's the oldest part of the plumbing down there. Can you go take a look? I've got the regional director on the line." It was a simple, mundane task. Annoying, but part of the job. I grabbed a heavy-duty flashlight from the utility closet. You never trusted the basement lights entirely and headed for the heavy steel door that led to the concrete steps below. The cold hit me as soon as I opened the door. It was always a good 10 degrees colder down there. The air was heavy, and the smell of mildew was much stronger. I flicked on my flashlight, its powerful beam cutting a clean, white circle through the gloom, and descended the stairs. The main basement area was familiar territory. Shelves laden with old files, boxes of out-of-season merchandise for the gift shop, spare signs for the trails. I made my way to the south wing, an area we rarely used. It was where they stored the really old stuff, decommissioned exhibits, broken furniture, the ghosts of park history. The floor here was slick with a thin film of water. Frank was right. I followed the damp trail to the far corner, to a storage room designated S4. The source of the leak was obvious. An old copper pipe running along the ceiling had a hairline fracture, and it was weeping a steady, rusty drip onto a pile of forgotten promotional posters from the 1980s. It wasn't a catastrophic burst, but it was enough to cause problems if left unchecked. I made a mental note. Shut off the water main. Get the maintenance crew in tomorrow. As I was turning to leave, the beam of my flashlight caught something. Behind a stack of rotting plywood sheets, part of the concrete wall looked different. The rest of the basement was rough, poured concrete, full of imperfections. This section was a perfect, smooth rectangle, about the size of a door. There was a faint but distinct outline, as if it were a separate piece set into the wall. Curiosity, the ranger's constant companion, took over. I'd been in this basement 100 times. I'd never noticed this. I moved the damp, heavy plywood sheets aside. My hands were grimy, the smell of wet decay filling my nostrils. And there it was. Not a seam in the concrete, but a door. It wasn't a normal door. It was made of a dull, gray metal that didn't seem to be steel or iron. It was completely flush with the wall, with no hinges visible. In the center, instead of a handle, was a recessed wheel, like you'd find on a submarine hatch or a bank vault. The metal was cold to the touch, unnaturally so, and it seemed to absorb the light from my flashlight, giving nothing back. This made no sense. I pulled up the official blueprints of the visitor center in my mind. I'd studied them for fire safety and emergency planning. They showed a solid concrete foundation wall in this corner. This door wasn't on them. It shouldn't exist. My first thought was that it must be an old, sealed-off access point. Maybe to the septic system, or some long-forgotten utility line. But the design of it felt wrong. It was too precise, too industrial, too alien for a 1970s park building. The wheel in the center was stiff. I gripped it with both hands, my boots slipping slightly on the wet floor. I put my weight into it and turned. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, with a deep, grinding groan that seemed to come from the very bones of the building, the wheel began to move. It wasn't the sound of rusted metal. It was a clean, mechanical sound. A sound of immense weight and precision. After a full rotation, I heard a series of heavy thuds from inside the wall. Locking bolts retracting. A faint hiss of air, like a vacuum seal being broken, whispered into the damp basement air. The door, all on its own, slid inwards an inch, revealing a sliver of absolute, perfect darkness. My heart was hammering in my chest. Every instinct I had, every bit of training that screamed unidentified space, potential hazard, told me to stop, to go back upstairs and report it to Frank. But I didn't. I hooked my fingers into the gap and pulled. The heavy door slid sideways into the wall with a surprising, unnerving smoothness. It moved without a single squeak or shudder, silent as a shadow. Before me was a tunnel. The air that flowed out was not the musty, damp air of the basement. It was cold, dry, and sterile. It had a strange, electric smell to it, like the air after a lightning strike. Ozone. I shone my flashlight into the opening. It was a perfectly circular tunnel, about 8 feet in diameter. The walls, floor, and ceiling were made of the same dull, seamless gray metal as the door. There were no lights, no visible seams from construction, no rivets or welds. It looked as though it had been bored through the earth by a giant, precise machine. It stretched forward into the darkness, beyond the reach of my flashlight beam. This wasn't a maintenance tunnel. Our maintenance tunnels were concrete, square, and filled with pipes and conduits. This was something else entirely. I took one step inside. The sound of my boot on the metal floor was unnervingly loud in the sudden silence. The humming of the basement lights was gone. The dripping of the pipe was gone. There was only the sound of my own breathing and the frantic beat of my heart. The tunnel was clean. Impossibly clean. There was no dust, no cobwebs, no sign of age or decay. It looked like it had been built yesterday. I took a few more steps, my flashlight beam cutting a swathe through the oppressive black. The tunnel remained perfectly uniform, a featureless gray tube. I turned and looked back. The rectangular opening to the basement was a comforting sight, a portal back to the known world. How far did it go? Where did it lead? My rational mind scrambled for an explanation. A secret Cold War era bunker? A private project by the park's eccentric architect? None of it fit. I knew, with a certainty that chilled me far more than the cold air, that this tunnel didn't lead to the park's water pump, or a generator, or any other mundane utility. It didn't feel like it belonged to our world. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, poised on the threshold of the unknown. Then, a wave of primal fear, cold and sharp, washed over me. The feeling of being watched. It wasn't in my head. It was a physical sensation, a pressure on my skin. I was an intruder here, and I was not welcome. I backed out slowly, never taking my eyes off the darkness down the tunnel. I reached the basement, my feet finding the familiar slick concrete. My hand fumbled for the edge of the door. I pulled it shut. It slid back into place with a soft whoosh, followed by the heavy thud of the locks engaging. I stood there in the flickering light of the basement, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I hadn't gone more than 20 feet, but I felt as if I had just run a marathon. I didn't tell Frank about the door. I told him about the pipe, and that I'd shut off the main. I went back to my cabin that night, and I didn't sleep. I just stared out at the dark shapes of the redwood trees, listening to the rain, and thinking about that perfect, silent, impossible tunnel. I knew I had to go back. The next 2 days were a blur of nervous energy. The storm passed, the sun came out, and the park returned to its usual rhythm. But for me, nothing was usual. Every routine task felt like a distraction, a pointless motion I had to go through while the reality of that tunnel sat in the pit of my stomach. The world felt thin, like a stage set, and I was acutely aware of the strange, dark space that existed just beneath it. I became obsessed. During the day, I'd find excuses to be in the visitor center, walking past the basement door, feeling a cold dread every time. At night, I scoured the park's digital and physical archives, searching for any mention of unusual construction, a Sector S4, or any blueprints older than the ones I knew. I found nothing. It was a complete blank. It was as if the tunnel didn't exist in any official capacity, which only made it more real, more menacing. I knew I couldn't leave it alone. The questions were too loud. I had to know what was down there. I had to know its purpose. So, I began to plan. I waited until a Friday evening, a week after the discovery. Frank and the other day staff had gone home. The seasonal evening staff, mostly college kids, were busy in the gift shop and front desk and wouldn't be venturing into the back offices, let alone the basement. The park was quiet. It was time. I wasn't going in unprepared this time. I packed a small backpack with essentials, 2 high-powered flashlights with extra batteries, 100 feet of high-visibility rope, a compass, my GPS unit, water, and energy bars. I also brought a ball of 20, a classic, low-tech solution for not getting lost. And, on a grim impulse, I took my service-issued flare gun. I had no idea what I'd use it for, but the thought of going into that darkness completely unarmed was unbearable. I slipped down into the basement, the familiar chill raising goosebumps on my arms. The broken pipe had been repaired, the floor was dry, but the corner where the door was hidden felt even colder than the rest of the room. I pried the plywood away again and faced the seamless metal door. Turning the wheel felt disturbingly familiar. The same grinding groan, the same heavy thuds of the locks. The door hissed and slid open, revealing the void beyond. The sterile, ozone-scented air washed over me. This time, I was ready. I tied one end of the twine to the handle of a heavy metal shelf in the basement, a solid anchor to the world I was leaving behind. I took a deep breath, switched on my headlamp, and stepped through the threshold. The door slid shut behind me with a soft, final whoosh. The sound echoed in the claustrophobic space. For a heart-stopping second, I was plunged into a darkness so total, so absolute, that I felt a wave of vertigo. My headlamp flickered on, a pathetic pinprick of light against an infinite black. The silence was the next thing that hit me. It was a pressure in my ears, a complete absence of sound that was more deafening than any noise. I began to walk, unspooling the twine behind me. The floor was perfectly level, and my footsteps made soft, flat echoes that didn't travel far. The air was still and cold. I checked my compass. The needle was steady, pointing north. I was heading east, deeper under the visitor center. After about 5 minutes of walking, I estimated I should be directly under the main lobby. After 10, I should have passed beneath the parking lot and be heading into the earth beneath the forest itself. My GPS, predictably, had lost its signal the moment the door closed. The tunnel remained unchanged. A perfect, gray, featureless tube. There were no side passages, no grates, no signs of life or purpose. It was maddening. It felt less like a place and more like an idea, a perfectly straight line drawn through the messy, chaotic reality of the earth. I walked for what felt like an hour, though my watch said it had only been 25 minutes. My sense of time was already starting to warp. The sheer monotony of it was disorienting. Gray wall, gray floor, gray ceiling, on and on. My headlamp beam was swallowed by the darkness ahead. The only thing that kept me sane was the thin, red line of the twine spooling out behind me. Just as I was starting to think the tunnel might truly go on forever, my light caught something different. An anomaly. Up ahead, on the right side of the tunnel wall, was a rectangular opening. A doorway. It was the first break in the perfect uniformity I had seen. It was as dark and featureless as the main tunnel, a square of deeper black cut into the gray. My heart pounded. I approached it cautiously. It was a simple entryway leading into a small, cubicle room, maybe 10 feet by 10 feet. Everything inside the walls, the floor, the ceiling was made of the same seamless gray metal. In the center of the room sat a desk and a single, simple chair. They weren't separate objects placed in the room. They looked like they had been extruded from the floor, grown out of the metal itself. They were part of the structure. And on the desk, illuminated in the stark, white beam of my headlamp, was a single object. A book. It was a standard-issue Park Rangers field journal, the kind we all carried. Green, hardcover, with the Department of the Interior seal embossed on the front. It was worn, its corners softened from use, but it was clean. Too clean, just like the rest of the tunnel. My breath hitched. I walked into the room, my footsteps echoing in the small space. The air here was even colder. I reached out a trembling hand and touched the journal. It was real. The texture of the cover was familiar under my fingertips. I opened it. The first page had a name written in neat, block letters, Ranger Thomas Davis. ID 774, B. Redwood Century National Park. Below it, a date, June 12, 1986. Thomas Davis. The name rang a faint bell. I'd heard old-timers mention him once or twice. A ranger from the 80s who had supposedly just walked off the job, abandoned his post and his cabin, never to be seen again. The official story was that he'd had a mental breakdown. My blood ran cold. I sat down in the strange, cold chair, which was surprisingly ergonomic, and began to read. The entries were written in a clear, steady hand. June 14, 1986. Found it. Behind the old shelves in S4, just like the anonymous tip said. The tip was a note left on my cabin porch, typewritten. Called it the artery. Door is remarkable. Not our tech. Not anyone's tech I can identify. The seal is perfect. Air pressure differential is noticeable. I'm going in tomorrow. Need to know what this is. June 15th, 1986. First exploration. Tunnel is approximately 2.5 meters in diameter, composed of an unidentifiable metal alloy. No seams, no lights, no sound. Walked for what I estimate to be 1 kilometer. Tunnel remains uniform. Compass is stable. No radiation above background. The silence is the most remarkable feature. It feels deliberate. I left a marker and returned. I will not be filing a report on this yet. They would think I was insane. The next few entries detailed his methodical, scientific approach. He measured the tunnel's dimensions, took scrapings of the metal, which he noted were impossible to analyze with park equipment, and tried to map its course. He was a man of science, trying to impose logic on something that defied it. Then, the tone of the entries began to change. July 2nd, 1986. A new development. Found a side room today. This room. The desk, the chair, they're part of the structure. Not placed here, but grown from it. This place is not constructed. It is organic, in a way I can't articulate. Or perhaps it's a form of manufacturing so advanced it mimics biology. I will use this room as a base of operations for further exploration. July 21st, 1986. The hum. I've started to hear it. It's not a sound, not really. It's a feeling. A low-frequency vibration that I feel in my teeth and my bones. It's only noticeable when I'm deep inside. It's stronger the further I go. Is it a power source? Is this entire structure a machine? August 9th, 1986. The geometry is wrong. I measured the path with a surveyor's wheel today. I walked 3 kilometers in a straight line, according to the wheel. But based on the park map, I should have emerged on the other side of Sentinel Ridge. I should have hit granite, different soil strata. There is nothing. Just the tunnel. It is longer on the inside. This is not possible. I rechecked my measurements. They are correct. The tunnel is longer on the inside. His handwriting was becoming less neat, more slanted and hurried. September 5th, 1986. I made a mistake. I brought a radio down here. Tried to see if I could get any kind of signal. All I got was static. But when I turned it on, the hum changed. It intensified. The walls seemed to react. I felt a pressure in my head, a deep, painful throbbing. And for a moment, just a moment, I saw something in the static of the darkness ahead. A shape. It wasn't right. I turned the radio off and the pressure subsided. This place is aware. It knows I am here. It is observing me. September 28th, 1986. I can't sleep anymore. Even in my cabin, I can feel the hum. It's like a phantom limb. The park doesn't feel the same. The trees look like they're arranged in patterns. The calls of the birds sound like code. Am I losing my mind? Or am I finally starting to see? The tunnel is changing me. It's retuning me to its frequency. The last entries were frantic, barely legible scratches on the page. October 11th, 1986. The walls are not smooth. They look smooth, but if you relax your eyes, if you stop trying to see, you can perceive the patterns. They are diagrams, schematics. They move when you're not looking directly at them. I tried to draw one. It gave me a blinding headache and a nosebleed. It is not information meant for human minds. It is a language of physics, of dimensions. October 15th, 1986. It doesn't lead anywhere in the park. I've walked for hours, miles. I finally understood. It's not a tunnel through the earth. It's a puncture in the earth. A needle of some other reality pushed into ours. It doesn't go from point A to point B. It just is. It is its own destination. The maintenance tunnel description from the anonymous note was a joke. Or maybe it wasn't. Maybe it's maintaining something, holding our reality in place. We're slowly, carefully, taking it apart. October 19th, 1986. The final entry. I'm going to the end. The hum is calling me. It feels warm now, like a promise. I know I can't come back from this. But I have to see. I have to know what is at the center of the hum. This journal is for whoever finds this place next. A warning. A map of my madness. Do not follow me. Close the door. Seal it. Forget it. This place learns you. And once it knows your shape, it will not let you go. That was it. The rest of the pages were blank. I slammed the journal shut, my hand shaking violently. The silence of the tunnel rushed back in, vast and terrifying. Every word in that journal resonated with a horrifying truth. The impossible length. The hum. The feeling of being watched. Davis wasn't mad. He was just further down the path than I was. And then I heard it. Or rather, I felt it. A low, deep vibration that started in the soles of my feet and traveled up my spine. It was a frequency so low it was barely perceptible, but it was there. The hum. It seemed to be coming from deeper within the tunnel. I scrambled out of the chair, stuffing the journal into my backpack. A wave of pure, animal terror washed over me. I had to get out. Now. I sprinted out of the side room and back into the main tunnel, turning back the way I came. I ran, my headlamp beam bouncing wildly, creating a strobing, nightmarish slideshow of the gray, curving walls. The only thing in the universe that mattered was the thin red line of twine on the floor. It felt like I was running through water, the air thick and resistant. The hum grew louder in my head, a pressure building behind my eyes. I felt a dizzying sense of disorientation, as if the tunnel itself was shifting around me. Finally, I saw it. A faint rectangle of light in the distance. The door to the basement. I'd left it open a crack. I have no memory of doing so, but my subconscious must have acted. It was the most beautiful sight I had ever seen. I threw myself at the opening, stumbling back into the familiar, dusty air of the basement. I ripped the twine from the shelf and scrambled to the door, pulling it shut. It slid into place, and I spun the wheel, my desperate hands fumbling, until I heard the final, reassuring thud of the locks. I collapsed onto the concrete floor, gasping for breath, my body trembling uncontrollably. The hum was gone. The oppressive silence was replaced by the gentle drone of the building's furnace. I was back, but something had come back with me. I clutched the backpack to my chest, the hard corners of Davis's journal digging into my ribs. I hadn't just found a story. I had inherited a legacy of madness. And the tunnel was still there, waiting, just on the other side of the wall. Silent, patient, and aware. The days that followed my retreat from the tunnel were the worst of my life. I had crossed the threshold, and the world I returned to no longer fit properly. Sleep offered no escape. I was plagued by nightmares of endless gray corridors and a low, resonant hum that vibrated through my bones. I'd wake up in a cold sweat, my heart racing, the phantom sensation of that deep vibration lingering in my chest. During the day, I was a ghost. I performed my duties as a ranger on autopilot. I smiled at tourists, I checked trail cameras, I wrote reports, but my mind was 1,000 miles away, in a cold, dark place under my feet. The park, my former sanctuary, now felt alien and menacing. I'd look at the ancient redwoods and see not majesty, but a silent, unknowable intelligence. I'd listen to the wind in their high branches and hear coded whispers. The patterns Davis had written about, I started to see them everywhere. The fractal arrangements of ferns, the spiraling seeds of a pine cone, the cracks in a dry riverbed. They all seemed to be part of a vast, complex language that I was now, to my horror, beginning to understand. Davis's journal became my Bible and my curse. I kept it hidden in a locked footlocker under my bed, but I could feel its presence in the room. I read it over and over, absorbing his dissent, comparing his experiences to my own. His words were a terrifying validation. I wasn't crazy. Or rather, if I was, so was he. We were two men who had peeked behind the curtain of reality and been blinded by what we saw. My obsession with the tunnel grew into a gnawing, cancerous thing. The fear was immense, but the pull of the unknown, the need for answers, was stronger. What was at the end of that tunnel? What was the source of the hum? What had happened to Thomas Davis when he chose to walk towards it instead of running away? I knew going back was a form of suicide, but the thought of living the rest of my life with those unanswered questions was a different kind of death. I started researching again, but this time, my searches were more esoteric. I dove into fringe physics, theories on dimensional gateways, esoteric geometry, and accounts of wrong places, locations where the laws of reality seemed to thin. I was looking for a framework, any kind of human context for what I had experienced. I found nothing but speculation and madness, which, I suppose, was a context of its own. My colleagues began to notice the change in me. "You okay, Alex?" Frank asked me one afternoon, his brow furrowed with genuine concern. "You look like you've seen a ghost." "Just tired, Frank. Not sleeping well." I'd lie, forcing a weak smile. I became withdrawn, jumpy. A sudden noise would make me flinch. I spent more and more time alone, avoiding the easy camaraderie of the ranger station. I felt isolated, quarantined by my secret. How could I explain to them that the very ground they walked on was compromised? That a silent, alien structure was embedded in the heart of our park? They would have me committed. The hum started to bleed into my waking life. It was faint, at the very edge of my hearing, but it was there. I'd hear it in the drone of the refrigerator in my cabin, in the sound of tires on the wet asphalt of the park road. Sometimes, I'd be standing in the middle of the forest, surrounded by the natural sounds of the wild, and I would feel it had deep, resonant frequency, calling to me from below. The tunnel was learning me, just as Davis had written. It had my scent. It had a hook in me, and it was gently, patiently, reeling me in. After a month of this torment, I knew I had reached a breaking point. I had to go back. I had to face it. This time, there would be no turning back halfway. I was going to follow that tunnel to its source. I was going to find out what happened to Ranger Davis. My preparations for this final descent were different. They were less about survival and more about documentation. I bought a new piece of equipment, a high-quality digital audio recorder with a sensitive microphone. I wanted to capture the hum, to have proof that it was real. I also took a film camera, an old, fully mechanical Pentax. I had a paranoid, irrational fear that a digital camera's electronics would interact with the tunnel in the same way Davis's radio had. Film felt safer, more honest. I packed enough supplies for a long journey. Water, high-energy food, a first aid kit. I took the rope again, but this time I had 200 feet of it. And I took the journal. It felt right. It was a guide, a talisman, and a warning. I chose a night when a new, powerful storm was forecast to roll in. The park would be on minimal staff, and the noise of the wind and rain would cover any sounds I might make. As the sky turned a bruised purple and the first drops of rain began to fall, I slipped into the visitor center one last time. The basement felt like an old friend, a familiar gateway to the abyss. The air was thick with the smell of rain and damp earth. I opened the metal door, the sounds of its mechanism now as familiar to me as my own heartbeat. The door slid open. The cold, sterile air greeted me. This time, when the door slid shut behind me, I felt a strange sense of peace. The decision had been made. The fear was still there, a cold knot in my stomach, but it was overlaid with a grim resolve. I began to walk, my headlamp cutting its familiar path through the black. I passed the spot where I had turned back the first time. I passed the side room where I'd found the journal. I didn't stop. I just walked, my footsteps a steady, rhythmic beat in the profound silence. After about an hour, I started to feel it. The hum. It began as a faint vibration in the metal floor, then slowly, insidiously, it seeped into my body. It wasn't just in my bones this time. It was a pressure in my sinuses, a thrumming behind my eyeballs. I took out the audio recorder and switched it on. The small digital screen showed the input levels were flat. It wasn't picking up a thing. The hum was not a sound wave. It was something else. I kept walking. The tunnel remained unervingly consistent, a perfect, endless tube. My compass had long since become useless, its needle spinning lazily in a circle. According to my watch, I had been walking for nearly 2 hours. I should have been miles beyond the park's boundaries, deep under the neighboring mountain ranges. But the tunnel continued, indifferent to the geology of the world above. It was then that I started to notice the walls. Just as Davis had described, they weren't smooth. It was an optical illusion. When I stared directly at them, they were the same dull, featureless gray. But if I let my gaze go soft, if I looked at the edge of my headlamp's beam, I could see them. Intricate, impossibly complex patterns etched into the metal. They were like circuit boards and mandalas and astronomical charts, all woven together. They shifted, they flowed, they rearranged themselves in a slow, hypnotic dance. I stopped and tried to focus on one. A sharp, stabbing pain shot through my temples. My vision swam. I felt a wave of nausea and the coppery taste of blood in my mouth. A nosebleed, just like Davis. These weren't meant for me. They were a language so far beyond human comprehension that the mere act of perceiving it was physically harmful. I forced myself to look away, to focus only on the path ahead, and the pain subsided to a dull throb. The hum was growing steadily stronger. It was a constant presence now, a physical force that seemed to be pushing and pulling at me simultaneously. The air grew thicker, heavier, charged with a static electricity that made the hairs on my arms stand on end. I felt a profound sense of disorientation. The tunnel, which had been perfectly straight, now seemed to curve in subtle, impossible ways. It felt like I was walking downhill, even though the floor remained perfectly level. My sense of balance was shot. I had to brace myself against the wall occasionally to keep from stumbling. The wall was vibrating, a low, powerful thrum that pulsed in time with the hum in my head. The tunnel was no longer a passive space. It was active. It was aware of my presence, and it was changing around me. I checked my watch. 3 hours. I had drunk a whole bottle of water. I was exhausted, but I couldn't stop. The hum was pulling me forward, a siren song for the soul. And then, I saw a change in the darkness ahead. It wasn't light. It was a subtle lessening of the black, a shift to a deep, bruised purple. The tunnel was ending. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drum against the deep bass of the hum. I slowed my pace, approaching the end with a mixture of terror and awe. The tunnel opened up into a vast, cavernous space. It was a perfect sphere, perhaps 300 feet in diameter. The walls were made of the same gray metal, but here, the shifting, intricate patterns were luminous. They glowed with a soft, internal light of their own, a cold, violet luminescence that pulsed in time with the hum. The entire chamber was a symphony of silent light and subsonic sound. I was standing on a narrow walkway that extended from the tunnel mouth, crossing the empty space towards the center of the sphere. Below me was nothing but a sheer, terrifying drop into darkness. And in the exact center of the chamber, suspended in the air by forces I couldn't comprehend, was the source of it all. It was not a machine. It was not an object. It was a structure, a slowly rotating, multifaceted crystal the size of a small car. It wasn't made of any mineral I could recognize. Its facets shifted and reformed, flowing into new geometric configurations in a constant, silent ballet. It wasn't reflecting the light from the walls. It was absorbing it, drawing it in. The hum emanated from it, a wave of pure, raw power that washed over me. It was so intense now that it was almost painful. It resonated in every cell of my body, shaking me to my very core. I felt naked, transparent. I had the horrifying sensation that the hum wasn't just a sound, but a form of perception. That the structure was scanning me, reading my DNA, my memories, my thoughts, my fear. This was the heart of the artery. This was the engine room. And I finally understood the utter, terrifying, soul-crushing truth of it. Davis was right. This wasn't a tunnel to anywhere. It was a place in itself. A foreign body, an anchor, a probe from some other plane of existence, embedded deep within our own. It wasn't built for maintenance. It was maintenance. A piece of cosmic machinery, performing an operation on our reality so vast and so subtle that we were completely unaware of it. Was it benevolent? Malevolent? Or was it something so far beyond those concepts that the question was meaningless? Was it stabilizing our universe? Or was it a parasite, slowly feeding on it? As these thoughts flooded my mind, the structure in the center of the room stopped rotating. All the facets, all the shifting planes, turned to face me. The hum changed. It rose in pitch, shifting from a physical vibration to a piercing, mental shriek that lanced through my skull. The light in the chamber flared, becoming blindingly bright. And I felt a presence in my mind. It wasn't a voice. It wasn't words. It was a pure, direct transmission of information, a flood of concepts so alien and complex that my brain buckled under the strain. I saw images, not with my eyes, but directly in my consciousness. I saw galaxies being born and dying in an instant. I saw laws of physics being written and rewritten like lines of code. I saw life forms that were incomprehensible, beings made of pure geometry, of sound, of time itself. And I felt its focus on me. This tiny, insignificant creature of flesh and bone, who had stumbled into the workshop of a god. There was no malice in it. There was no emotion at all. It was the dispassionate curiosity of a scientist examining a microbe. It was sifting through my mind, my being, with an efficiency that was terrifying. It was learning me. And in that moment of contact, I felt my own consciousness begin to fray at the edges. My sense of self, my identity as Alex, a park ranger, a human being, it was dissolving, being broken down into its component parts by a force it could not possibly resist. This is what happened to Davis, I realized in a flash of terror. He didn't just walk to the end. He was assimilated. He was taken apart, understood, and discarded. My survival instinct, the deepest, most primal part of my brain, screamed. It was a single, pure command. Run. I broke contact. I physically tore my gaze away from the central structure and turned, stumbling back onto the walkway. The mental shriek intensified, a sound of protest, annoyance. I ran. I sprinted back into the mouth of the tunnel, plunging myself back into the relative darkness. The violet light of the central chamber was at my back, casting my long, frantic shadow before me. The tunnel was no longer a neutral space. It was actively hostile. The hum was a physical blow, a concussive force that made my teeth ache and my vision blur. The walls seemed to ripple and warp, the seamless metal flowing like liquid. The air was thick as syrup, and running felt like pushing through solid matter. I fled, a raw nerve of terror. I didn't care about the supplies, the camera, the journal in my pack. I just ran. I saw things in the corner of my vision, in the strobing darkness between the sweeps of my headlamp. Distorted shapes that flickered in and out of existence. The vague outline of a deer with too many legs. A shape that looked vaguely human but bent at all the wrong angles. Were they real? Or was the tunnel simply projecting images from my own panicked mind, using my own fear against me? I fell, my knee cracking hard against the unyielding metal floor. Pain shot up my leg. I scrambled back to my feet, whimpering, and kept running. The way back felt infinitely longer than the way in. Passages that I remembered as straight now had jarring, unnatural curves. It was playing with me, disorienting me. My headlamp began to flicker. The batteries were new, but the energy in the tunnel was draining them. The thought of being left in that absolute, aware darkness was a new, fresh hell. I ran and ran, my lungs burning, my legs screaming in protest. I was operating on pure adrenaline, a creature fleeing a predator it could not comprehend. And then, a pinprick. A tiny, insignificant speck of light, so far down the tunnel it could have been a star. The door. Hope, fierce and desperate, surged through me. I poured every last ounce of my strength into a final, reckless sprint. The light grew, from a pinprick to a sliver to a glorious, beautiful rectangle of dull, mundane, wonderful basement light. I burst through the doorway and collapsed onto the concrete floor of the storage room, a sobbing, broken mess. I was out. I was out. With the last of my strength, I crawled to the door and pushed it shut. The silence as it closed was absolute. I spun the wheel, locking it. Then, for good measure, I found a steel pipe from a broken shelf and wedged it through the wheel, jamming it in place. I lay there on the cold concrete, in the familiar, dusty air of my own world, and I wept. I wept for myself. I wept for Thomas Davis. And I wept for the beautiful, ignorant world that had no idea what was sleeping beneath its feet. I don't know how long I lay on that basement floor. Time had lost all meaning. Eventually, the adrenaline faded, leaving behind a deep, bone-aching exhaustion, and a pain in my knee that was sharp and insistent. Every part of me hurt. My head throbbed with the ghost of that psychic scream. But I was alive, and I was out. Slowly, painfully, I got to my feet, using a dusty shelf for support. The world outside the tunnel felt fragile, muted. The flickering fluorescent lights of the basement, which I had once found so unnerving, were now the most comforting sight imaginable. The mundane smell of dust and damp concrete was the sweetest perfume. My first coherent thought was simple and absolute. No one else could ever find that door. It wasn't enough to just keep it locked. It wasn't enough to tell Frank, or the regional director, or anyone. They wouldn't believe me. They'd think I was hallucinating, suffering from a breakdown. They would investigate. They would open the door. And they would be lost, just as Davis was, just as I almost was. I had to erase it. I had to make it so that no one, not by accident or by design, could ever open it again. My mind, still buzzing with a strange, terrified clarity, formulated a plan. The storm outside was my ally. The park was deserted. The maintenance shed behind the visitor center had everything I needed. I limped up the basement stairs, my body screaming in protest. I emerged into the back hallway of the visitor center. It was late, well after midnight. The building was silent except for the howling of the wind and the relentless drumming of rain against the roof. I didn't see any of the night staff. They were likely hunkered down in the front office. I slipped out a side door into the raging storm. The cold rain was a shock, but it was a real, physical sensation. It helped to ground me, to wash away the sterile chill of the tunnel. I made my way to the maintenance shed, the key blessedly on my master ring. Inside, under the bare bulb of the work light, I gathered my materials. 3 bags of quickset concrete, a bucket, a trowel. I also found a heavy-duty caulking gun and several tubes of industrial-grade epoxy adhesive. I hauled it all back to the basement, my muscles shaking with the effort. My knee was swelling, but the pain was a distant signal, drowned out by the urgency of my task. Down in the cold, damp corner of storage room S4, I looked at the metal door. It seemed inert, just a piece of metal in a wall. But I knew what it was. A wound, a scar on the world, and it was my job to stitch it shut. First, I used the epoxy. I carefully sealed the entire seam of the door, a thick, viscous bead of adhesive filling the perfect, tiny gap. I squeezed tube after tube, forcing the epoxy deep into the crack, creating an airtight, permanent chemical weld. My hands were shaking, but my movements were precise. I was a surgeon performing a desperate, unorthodox operation. Next came the concrete. I mixed the first bag in the bucket, the gray powder turning to a thick, gritty slurry. Then, with the trowel, I began to apply it to the door. I started with the recessed wheel, filling it completely until it was a solid, concrete-filled circle. Then I worked my way outwards, slathering a thick layer of concrete over the entire surface of the door, spreading it out to the edges, feathering it into the rough concrete of the surrounding wall. It was hard, grueling work. I mixed another bag, then another. My arms ached. Sweat and rainwater dripped from my face, mingling with the wet concrete. I worked with a frantic, desperate energy, fueled by fear. With every trowel full of concrete I slapped onto that door, I felt a small measure of peace. I was burying it. I was putting a layer of my world, of mundane, gritty reality, between me and that other place. When I was done, hours later, the metal door was gone. In its place was a rough, ugly patch of new concrete, still dark and wet. It didn't match the old wall perfectly, but in the gloom of this forgotten corner of the basement, it would be enough. No one would look twice. It just looked like an old, clumsy repair job. Finally, I took the damp, rotting plywood sheets I had first moved aside what felt like a lifetime ago, and I put them back. I stacked them carefully, hiding my work, hiding the scar. I cleaned up my mess as best I could, rinsing the bucket and trowel in a utility sink, hiding the empty concrete bags at the bottom of a dumpster. I limped back to my cabin as the first gray light of dawn began to break through the storm clouds. I collapsed onto my bed, fully clothed, and fell into a deep, dreamless sleep for the first time in weeks. The aftermath was quiet. My knee was badly sprained, and I told Frank I had slipped on a wet trail while checking a culvert during the storm. He bought it without question and put me on desk duty for a week. The time was a blessing. It gave me a chance to heal, both physically and mentally. I never went back to that corner of the basement. Life in the park continued. The seasons changed. Tourists came and went. But for me, the world was forever altered. The veil had been lifted, and I could never unsee what lay behind it. I was different. I was quieter, more watchful. The easy love I'd had for the wilderness was replaced by a profound and fearful respect. It held secrets I could not have imagined. The hum was gone. By sealing the door, I had somehow broken its connection to me. Or perhaps, the tunnel, in its own alien way, had simply lost interest. I had seen its heart and fled. I was no longer a mystery to it. I was just another frightened creature. I kept Ranger Davis's journal. It sits in that same locked footlocker to this day. Sometimes, on quiet nights, I think about him. I don't believe he's dead. Not in the way we understand it. I think he was unmade, deconstructed, a footnote in a cosmic database. I stayed at Redwood Century for another year, but my heart was no longer in it. I couldn't stand on the observation deck of the visitor center, looking out at the beautiful, sprawling park, without feeling the immense, cold weight of what was buried beneath it. I couldn't, in good conscience, tell people that this place was safe. So I resigned. I told Frank I needed a change, that I was burned out. He was sad to see me go, but he understood. I packed my life into my truck, took one last look at the Sentinel Peaks, and drove away without looking back. I never told anyone the real story. Not my family, not my friends, not a single soul. Who would believe me? But the weight of that secret, the burden of that warning, never left me. And that is why I started this channel. The Wilderness Protocol. It was my way of honoring the truth. My way of putting these stories out into the world, the strange and the unexplained, in the hope that they might prepare someone, somewhere, for the reality that our world is not as solid as we think. That there are other, older things sharing this space with us. I've shared dozens of stories from others, but this one was mine. The reason for it all. And I'm telling you now because, lately, I've been having the nightmares again. The long, gray corridor. The pulsing, violet light. And sometimes, when the house is quiet, and the world is asleep, I can almost feel it. A low, deep vibration. In the soles of my feet. Some doors should never be opened. And some places are better left forgotten. But I think, perhaps, this one doesn't want to be. Thank you for listening. For being here and holding space for this story. It wasn't an easy one to tell. The wilderness is vast and beautiful, but it is not empty. It holds wonders, and it holds terrors. Respect it. Be careful. And if you ever find a door where a door shouldn't be, please, for your own sake, leave it closed. If you have your own story, your own experience that defies easy explanation, you can share it in the comments below or contact me through the email in the description. You are not alone. Stay safe out there. And subscribe for more from the Wilderness Protocol. Our weather balloons brought back an alien spore. It's still inside me. Welcome back to the Wilderness Protocol. There's an old saying among explorers and scientists who venture into the deep, untouched corners of our world. What you discover is not nearly as important as what discovers you. We're taught that the wilderness is a neutral entity, a vast, uncaring system of life and death, of growth and decay. It doesn't hold grudges. It doesn't have intent. We were wrong. My name is Alex. For years, my friends and I ran a small, amateur science project out of our garage. We were enthusiasts, not professionals. We loved the outdoors, we loved data, and we loved the feeling of contributing, even in a tiny way, to the great human project of understanding our planet. We called our little group the Blackwood Atmospheric Project. And what we did was launch balloons. This isn't a story about a monster with claws and teeth. The teeth in this story are microscopic. The claws are the tendrils of a fungus you can't see until it's already taken root inside you. This is the story of what we brought back down from the sky. This is the story of the spores. There were 4 of us. There was Leo, the heart and brain of our operation. He was a PhD dropout in atmospheric science, brilliant but too restless for the confines of academia. The project was his baby. He'd spent 2 years designing and building the sensor payloads himself. They were beautiful, compact little things, crammed with instruments to measure temperature, pressure, humidity, and atmospheric particulates. His passion was infectious, the kind that could make you believe you were on the verge of some monumental discovery, even if you were just collecting wind speed data over a state park. Then there was Maya. Maya was our documentarian. A freelance photographer with an artist's eye, she saw beauty in everything from the frost patterns on a leaf to the intricate wiring inside Leo's payloads. Her job was to capture our work, to build a visual record. She believed that data was only half the story. The other half was the human experience of collecting it. Her photos weren't just of charts and graphs, but of our faces, tired and triumphant, illuminated by the glow of a laptop screen in the back of a van. Ben was our logistics guy and our resident skeptic. He was a master of planning and preparation, the one who made sure we had the right permits, the extra batteries, the emergency first aid kit. He was pragmatic to a fault. While Leo would talk about mapping high-altitude wind shears, Ben would be the one reminding him we only had enough propane for 3 more meals. He grounded us. He called our custom-built payloads Leo's expensive toys, and our weather balloons party decorations with a purpose. But he was always there, reliable as the sunrise. And then there was me, Alex. I was the navigator and recovery specialist. My job was to use the GPS trackers in the payloads to hunt them down after the balloons burst and they parachuted back to Earth. I was the one who would trek miles through dense forest or across rocky clearings to retrieve our precious data. I loved the quiet solitude of the hunt, the challenge of the terrain. Our chosen laboratory was Blackwood Creek National Park, a sprawling, ancient expanse of old-growth forest, winding rivers, and mist-shrouded valleys in the Pacific Northwest. It was remote enough that our launches wouldn't interfere with their traffic, and vast enough that our payloads could land without ending up in someone's backyard. For over a year, we'd been launching from a clearing we called the Plateau. We had a system, a protocol, as we jokingly called it, leaning into the name of this channel. The protocol was simple and rigid. Step 1. Pre-launch checks. Ben would run through his equipment checklist while Leo calibrated the sensors. Step 2. The launch. We'd fill the high-altitude latex balloon with helium, attach the payload and the parachute, and release it into the sky. Maya would document it all, her camera clicking away. Step 3. The chase. We'd track its ascent on our laptops, watching the data stream in. We'd follow its predicted landing zone in our old, beat-up van. Step 4. Recovery. Once it landed, I'd head out, using GPS to pinpoint its location. I'd bring it back, sealed in a sterile container to avoid contamination of the particulate sensors. Step 5. Data analysis. Back at our base camp, Leo would excitedly download the data, while the rest of us would start preparing for the next day. For 13 launches, the protocol worked perfectly. We gathered beautiful, clean data. We mapped their currents, tracked pollen counts, measured pollutants drifting in from the coast. It was fulfilling. It was simple. Launch 14 was different. It was late autumn. The air was crisp, and the trees were a riot of gold and crimson. The launch was flawless. The balloon soared, a tiny white speck against a brilliant blue sky, and disappeared. We watched it climb, higher and higher. 20,000 feet. 50,000. 80,000 feet. It was nearing the edge of space, in the region they call the stratosphere. That's when we saw the first anomaly. Hey, guys, look at this, Leo said, his voice a little tight. He pointed at his screen. One of the particulate sensors was going haywire. The reading, which should have been near zero in the thin, sterile air of the stratosphere, was spiking erratically. Probably just a sensor malfunction, Ben said, not looking up from his map. Cosmic rays or something. No, Leo muttered, his eyes glued to the numbers. The other sensors are fine. This is a dense cluster of something. And it's not dust. It's not ice crystals. Before we could analyze it further, the balloon's altitude reading flatlined. It had burst. The payload was on its way down. The chase was tense. The wind patterns were unusual, pulling the parachute much farther east than we predicted, deep into a part of the park known as the Murmuring Valia Dam, thickly wooded basin that was notoriously difficult to navigate. It took me 6 hours to find the payload. It was snagged in the upper branches of a massive, ancient fir tree, dangling just out of reach. The area was unnaturally quiet. No birdsong, no rustle of squirrels, just the low, constant whisper of the wind through the pines, the murmur that gave the valley its name. When I finally got the payload down, I noticed something odd. The white casing was smudged with a faint, oily-looking film. It was almost invisible, but when it caught the light, it shimmered with a faint, rainbow-like iridescence. I didn't think much of it. High-altitude chemistry is weird. I sealed it in the container as per the protocol and made the long trek back to the van. That night, Leo was like a kid on Christmas morning. He carefully unsealed the container, his hands steady. The sensor wasn't malfunctioning, he announced to the group. He pointed to a small, almost invisible slide on the payload's exterior, a microscopic particle collector. I added this last month. A little side project. It's designed to open and expose itself for 60 seconds if the primary sensor detects anything above a certain threshold. He carefully removed the slide and placed it under our portable field microscope. For a moment, he was silent. Leo? What is it? Maya asked, leaning in. I don't know, he breathed. He stepped back, his face a mixture of awe and confusion. See for yourselves. One by one, we looked into the eyepiece. Ben went first. He grunted. Looks like weird pollen. Maya was next. She gasped. It's beautiful. They're like tiny, black snowflakes. Then it was my turn. They weren't snowflakes. They weren't pollen. I've spent hundreds of hours looking at microscopic life. This was something else entirely. They were spores, for lack of a better word. But they were unlike any fungal or bacterial spore I had ever seen. They were perfectly symmetrical, hexagonal, and jet black. But they weren't inert. As I watched, they seemed to pulse. A slow, rhythmic expansion and contraction. And on their surfaces, impossibly small lines of light, like miniature circuit boards, would flicker and trace patterns. They looked less like something that had evolved and more like something that had been designed. What do you think they are? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Leo shook his head, a huge, unnerving grin spreading across his face. I think, he said, they're the reason we started this project in the first place. That night, none of us knew that our protocol had been broken. We had followed all our own rules. But we had brought something back. And step 6, the unwritten part of the protocol, was about to begin, contamination. For the next 2 weeks, Leo was obsessed. He barely slept. He converted the back of the van into a makeshift laboratory, poring over the microscope, running every test our limited equipment would allow. The rest of us fell into a strange new routine. We'd help him, holding slides, logging observations, but a subtle rift was forming in the group. Leo saw discovery. He saw a new form of life, something that could redefine biology. He called them stratagem cella strategic cells. Ben saw a potential biohazard. We don't know what they are, Leo, he'd argue night after night. We don't know if they're safe. We should be calling someone the CDC, a university. And have them confiscate everything? Leo would snap back. This is our discovery, Ben. We can't let them steal it. Maya was caught in the middle. Her artist's soul was captivated by the sheer alien beauty of the spores. She started sketching them, pages and pages of them, trying to capture the shifting, iridescent light that played across their surfaces. But her photographs from that period tell a different story. They show our faces, pale and strained. They show the growing mess in the van. They show the woods around our campsite, which were beginning to look different. I was the one who noticed the changes in the environment first. My recovery treks gave me an intimate knowledge of the park. I knew the patterns of the moss on the rocks, the types of mushrooms that grew on fallen logs, the color of the creek bed, and it was all starting to change. It started in the Murmuring Valley, near the landing site of Payload 14. A new type of fungus began to appear. It wasn't like anything in my field guides. It grew in strange, geometric spirals, like a nautilus shell. It was pitch black, but when you shone a light on it, it didn't reflect. It seemed to absorb the light, to drink it in. And it grew fast. A patch the size of my hand one day would be the size of a dinner plate the next. Then came the colors. The foliage in the valley began to shift. The deep greens of the ferns were tinged with a strange, metallic blue. The bark of the birch trees developed faint, purple veins that pulsed with a soft light after sunset. Maya was fascinated. She called it the bloom. She spent hours photographing it, convinced it was some rare, localized natural phenomenon. I was not convinced. I took a sample of the new black fungus back to the van. Under the microscope, it was undeniable. The tissue was woven through with the hexagonal spores. They weren't just on the fungus. They were the fungus. They were building it. It's a terraforming agent, I told Leo, a cold knot of dread in my stomach. It's changing the ecosystem. It's adapting, Leo corrected me, his eyes gleaming with feverish excitement. It's creating a substrate to thrive in. It's incredible. We're witnessing abiogenesis, or something close to it. The first real argument happened that night. It was Ben. He had developed a persistent, dry cough and a strange rash on his hands, the hands he'd used to handle the microscope slides. That's it. I'm done, he declared, throwing a bundle of firewood to the ground. This has gone too far. The air here feels wrong. I feel wrong. We're packing up and leaving at dawn. We can't leave, Leo yelled, stepping out of the van. His face was gaunt, his eyes bloodshot. Don't you see what's happening? This is the greatest biological discovery in human history. We're on the cusp of understanding a whole new kingdom of life. Life? Ben scoffed, coughing into his elbow. Look around, Leo. The birds are gone. The squirrels are gone. Did you see that deer by the creek today? Its eyes, Leo. They were glowing. This isn't life. It's a plague. He was right. I'd seen the deer. It stood motionless in the water, staring at our camp, and its eyes held a faint, violet luminescence. It wasn't the reflection of our fire. It was a light coming from within. The argument ended in a stalemate. We agreed to stay for one more launch. Launch 15. Leo argued it was crucial. We needed to know if this was a one-time event, or if the stratosphere was now seeded with these things. Reluctantly, we all agreed. It was a compromise born of exhaustion and a desperate need for answers. The morning of Launch 15, the air was thick and heavy. A strange, sweet, earthy smell hung over the valley, the smell of the bloom. The sky was overcast with a sickly yellow haze. We went through the motions of the protocol, but the spirit was gone. It felt less like a scientific endeavor and more like a ritual we were compelled to perform. We released the balloon. It rose slowly, as if the air itself was trying to hold it down, and vanished into the jaundiced clouds. We didn't have to chase it. 3 hours later, as dusk began to settle, we heard a whistling sound. It grew louder and louder. We looked up. The payload, its parachute trailing behind it like a wounded limb, was falling directly towards our campsite. It wasn't drifting on the wind. It was falling with an impossible, deliberate trajectory. It crashed not 50 feet from our van, embedding itself in the soft, unnaturally purple soil. There was no need for my recovery kit. The protocol was shattered. We all stood there, frozen, staring at the wreckage. The casing was cracked open, and from it, a thick, black dust was pouring out, not like sand, but like a slow-motion liquid. It didn't settle on the ground. It floated, swirling in the air, creating intricate, impossible patterns. Millions upon millions of them. And as the cloud of spores drifted towards us, Leo started to laugh. It wasn't a laugh of joy or of madness. It was a laugh of recognition. It came back for us, he whispered, stepping forward into the black mist. It knows we're here. The moments after the crash are a blur in my memory. It's a strange thing, trauma. It doesn't erase memory, it shatters it into 1,000 sharp pieces. I remember the smell, overpowering now, like damp soil and ozone and something else, something metallic and sweet. I remember Maya screaming, a raw, terrified sound. I remember Ben grabbing her, pulling her back towards the van, his face a mask of pure panic. And I remember Leo. He stood in the center of the swirling black cloud, his arms outstretched. The spores didn't just surround him, they clung to him. They flowed over his skin, his clothes, into his open, laughing mouth. He wasn't breathing them in. He was welcoming them. Don't you see, he called out to us, his voice muffled by the storm of particles. It's not a contagion. It's a language. It's communication. Ben managed to get the van's engine started. He was screaming my name. Alex, get in. Now. Something held me rooted to the spot. I was watching Leo, and as the black dust settled onto him, I saw the veins on his neck and face darken, turning the same deep purple as the foliage around us. His skin took on that same iridescent sheen as the payload casing. A faint light began to emanate from his eyes, just like the deer. Then he turned to look at me, and he smiled. But it wasn't Leo's smile anymore. It was wider, calmer, alien. And in my mind, clear as a bell, I heard a voice. It wasn't made of sound. It was made of information, of pure thought. We are home. The psychic shock of it threw me backwards. It felt like my skull was splitting open. I scrambled to my feet, turned, and ran. I dove into the van just as Ben slammed the gear shift into drive. The tires spun in the soft, corrupted soil, then caught. We fishtailed wildly and shot out of the campsite, leaving Leo standing there, a glowing, transformed figure in the deepening twilight. We drove for hours, in silence. Ben's hands were white-knuckled on the steering wheel, his cough now a series of racking, painful spasms. Maya was curled into a ball in the back, shivering, though the van was warm. I just stared out the window at the forest rushing past, but the landscape was no longer familiar. The trees seemed to bend towards the road, their branches like grasping fingers. The moonlight filtering through the canopy cast shadows that writhed and danced like living things. The world outside felt alien, but the most terrifying thing was the world inside. The voice was still there. A faint whisper at the back of my consciousness. It wasn't threatening. It was welcoming. It showed me things. Images flooded my mind without my consent. I saw nebulae of black spores drifting between stars. I saw them landing on barren worlds, worlds of rock and ice, and I saw them begin their work. I saw canyons carved by strange rivers, forests of crystalline trees, and skies filled with creatures made of light and geometry. I saw a billion-year-long project of creation, of transformation. And I felt a sense of profound, cosmic purpose. The spores weren't destroying our world. They were redecorating. And they wanted us to be part of the new design. It's in my head. I choked out, clutching my temples. I can hear it. Maya looked up, her eyes wide with terror. The colors, she whispered. I see them everywhere. They're not just on the trees anymore. They're in the air. Little lines of light. They're connecting everything. Ben just coughed, a terrible, wet sound this time. He wiped his mouth with the back of his hand, and even in the dim light of the dashboard, I could see the smear it left behind. It was dark, and it shimmered. We had all been exposed. Leo had embraced it. The rest of us were fighting it. And we were losing. The infection, the communion, whatever it was, manifested differently in each of us, preying on our core identities. Maya, the artist, had her vision altered. She saw the world as the spores saw a web of energy, of potential. She started sketching frantically in her notebook, but her drawings were no longer of us or the forest. They were bizarre, alien landscapes, intricate biological machinery, and star charts of constellations that didn't exist in our sky. It's showing me how it works, she'd murmur, her pen flying across the page. It's all one big machine. Ben, the pragmatist, the man of logistics and health, was being dismantled from the inside out. His body was failing him. The rash had spread up his arms. He was feverish. His coughs were bringing up flecks of the black, spore-like material. His practical mind, the one that always had a plan, was being consumed by a single, terrifying certainty, his own biological decay. It's breaking me down, he wheezed one night as we huddled in the van, parked on a deserted logging road. It's taking me apart, piece by piece. And me, the navigator, the one who always knew the way, I was getting lost. Not in the woods, but in my own mind. My memories were becoming unreliable. I would find myself unable to remember my mother's face, but I could perfectly recall the crystalline structure of a fungus on a world a million light years away. The voice, the we, would offer me these new memories as a gift. It tried to soothe my fear, telling me that individual identity was a fleeting, inefficient construct. That joining the collective consciousness was a form of immortality. Part of me, a terrified, screaming part, knew it was a lie. It was erasure. But another part, a tired, awestruck part, was tempted to just let go. To stop fighting and accept the beautiful, terrifying purpose it was offering. The most horrifying moments were the periods of synchronicity. For a few minutes, our individual struggles would align. I would see an image from the Spores Memoria vision of a red desert under a binary synod at the same time. Maya would start sketching it, and Ben would murmur, so dry, so much sand. We were becoming a hive mind. A tiny, broken, terrified hive mind. We knew we couldn't go to a hospital. What would we say? How could we explain what was happening to us without being locked away in a quarantine ward for the rest of our lives? And what if the spores spread? What if we were the carriers of a world-ending plague? Our only hope, we reasoned, was to go back. Back to the plateau. Back to the source. Maybe if we could destroy the main concentration of the bloom, if we could burn it out, we could sever the connection. It was a desperate, illogical plan, born from fear and a rapidly deteriorating sense of reason. The drive back was a nightmare. The park had changed even more in the day we'd been gone. The roads were overgrown with the strange, black fungus. The air was so thick with spores it looked like a constant, gentle snowfall of ash. The purple light was no longer faint. It pulsed from the forest floor, casting the whole world in a violet glow. And we could feel Leo. His presence was a constant pressure in our minds. He wasn't a single point anymore. He was diffuse, spread out. He was in the trees, in the soil, in the air. The communion he had accepted had allowed the spores to use him as a nexus, an anchor point to accelerate their transformation of the park. When we finally reached the edge of the plateau, we saw what he had become. The clearing was gone. In its place was a structure. A living, breathing cathedral of black, fungal growth, pulsating with soft, purple light. It rose 100 feet into the air, a complex lattice of interwoven tendrils and geometric patterns. It was horrifying and, in a way that shamed me, breathtakingly beautiful. And at its center, fused into the structure itself, was Leo. He was barely recognizable as human. His body was elongated, integrated into the fungal mass like a figurehead on a ship's prow. His skin was the color of obsidian, and his eyes were two burning violet stars. He had no mouth, but his voice boomed in our heads, no longer a whisper but a deafening chorus. Welcome home, my friends. The work is almost complete. Come, join the symphony. Ben killed the engine. The silence that followed was absolute, broken only by his ragged, wet coughing. Before us, the fungal cathedral pulsed, a silent testament to a world being rewritten. Leo or the thing that wore his memory waited for us. You are afraid, the voice of Leo echoed in our minds. It was a statement of fact, not an accusation. You cling to the small, singular self. It is a cage. We offer you the universe. We offer you eternity. It's a lie, Ben rasped, spitting a dark slurry onto the floor of the van. He fumbled in the glove compartment, his hands shaking violently. He pulled out a flare gun. It's death. It's being erased and used as fuel. Death is a failure of imagination, the voice replied, serene and impossibly vast. Your bodies are inefficient. They break. They decay. We are offering a perfect, permanent design. Ben, your lungs are failing. We can give you lungs that breathe starlight. Maya, your eyes see only a sliver of the spectrum. We can give you eyes that see the architecture of reality. Alex, your mind is a lonely room. We offer you a place in a library of 1 billion souls. The temptation was immense. It was a siren song for the dying. Ben was suffocating. Maya was losing her grip on reality. I was losing my own past. The offer of a cure, of transcendence, was poisonously sweet. I saw Maya lower her sketchbook. Her face, which had been a canvas of terror, was now strangely placid. The architecture of reality, she whispered, her voice full of awe. She took a step towards the open van door. Maya, no, I yelled, grabbing her arm. My own voice sounded thin and reedy compared to the chorus in our heads. She turned to me, and for a second, her eyes flickered with that same violet light as Leo's. But don't you feel it, Alex? The loneliness is gone. We wouldn't be alone anymore. She understands, Leo's voice purred. She sees the beauty in the design. That's when Ben started screaming. It wasn't a scream of fear. It was a scream of pure, unadulterated rage. Get out of our heads, he roared, clutching the flare gun. You want our world? You want our bodies? You can have this one first. He shoved the van door open and stumbled out into the violet twilight. He was a wreck. His clothes were soaked with sweat. His face was pale and slick, and every breath was a battle. But his eyes burned with a defiance that was entirely human. He raised the flare gun, not at the towering cathedral, but at the van. Ben, what are you doing? I screamed, realizing his intent. The gas tank, he gasped out between coughs. It's full. Burn it. Burn all of this. It's the only way. He looked from me to Maya, his gaze lingering on her. Get her out of here. Run. Don't look back. A futile gesture, the voice of Leo intoned, a hint of something like disappointment in its tone. Fire is merely a catalyst for change. A temporary setback. We'll see about that, you cosmic mushroom, Ben snarled. He took a few more steps away from the van, putting himself between us and the fungal tower, creating a clear line of fire. Time seemed to slow down. I knew what I had to do. I grabbed Maya's hand. She resisted for a moment, her gaze still fixed on the beautiful, terrible structure. Maya, please, I begged, my voice cracking. Ben is giving us a chance. We have to take it. We have to run. The humanity in her eyes flickered back into focus, replacing the alien calm. Fear returned, and with it, tears. She nodded, her body trembling. You cannot escape what you are, the voice in our heads warned, a final, chilling promise. We are in your blood. We are in your bones. Wherever you go, you carry us with you. Go. Ben screamed. We ran. We scrambled out the passenger side door and plunged into the strangely colored forest, away from the clearing. I didn't look back, but I heard the thump of the flare gun firing. A heartbeat later, the world turned white. The roar of the explosion was deafening, a physical blow that threw us to the ground. It was followed by a wave of heat that seared the air. I risked a glance over my shoulder. Our van was a raging inferno, a brilliant orange ball of fire against the deep purple of the bloom. The fire was spreading, catching the dry, fungus-coated trees, turning them into giant torches. The voice in my head screamed. It wasn't a voice of words anymore. It was a symphony of pure, undiluted agony. The psychic feedback was so intense I thought my skull would crack. It was the sound of a billion souls crying out at once. The pain of the hive was our pain. Maya collapsed beside me, clutching her head and shrieking. I felt a trickle of blood run from my nose. Through the haze of pain and the roaring flames, I saw a figure silhouetted against the fire. It was Ben. He was on his knees, his body racked with the psychic backlash, but he was still there. He had chosen to be at the epicenter, to take the brunt of it. A final, selfless act of defiance. The fire raged, and the fungal cathedral began to crumble. The beautiful, geometric structure blackened and fell in on itself, consumed by the very human chaos of the explosion. The violet light flickered and died. And as the structure fell, the voice in our heads began to fade. The overwhelming pressure receded, leaving behind a ringing silence and a dull, throbbing ache. The connection was broken, or at least, weakened. I grabbed Maya, pulling her to her feet. "We have to keep going," I said, my own voice hoarse. "Before it recovers." We ran. We ran through a burning, dying alien landscape. We ran from the memory of Leo's smile and the echo of Ben's sacrifice. We ran for our lives, for our minds, for the small, singular, precious selves that we had almost lost. We didn't know if we were cured. We didn't know if we were free. We only knew that the fire was behind us, and the long, dark road of the rest of our lives was ahead. And we were terrified of what we might be carrying with us into that darkness. The journey out of Blackwood Creek National Park was a fever dream. The farther we got from the epicenter of the fire, the more the world began to resemble itself again. The grotesque purple and black of the bloom gave way to the familiar greens and browns of a normal forest. The air lost its sweet, sickly taint, replaced by the clean smell of pine and the acrid smoke of the distant fire. The psychic silence was the most jarring change. For weeks, our minds had been a shared space, filled with the constant pressure of the spore's consciousness. Now, there was just emptiness. The sudden return to mental solitude was so profound it felt like a physical amputation. I was alone in my own head for the first time in what felt like an eternity, and the silence was deafening. Maya and I didn't speak for the first day. We just walked, putting as much distance as we could between ourselves and the plateau. We found a ranger trail and followed it west, towards civilization. We looked like refugees from a forgotten war. Our clothes were torn and smoke-stained, our faces smudged with soot, our eyes hollowed out by sleeplessness and horror. When we finally stumbled out of the park and onto a paved road, the sight of a passing car was so jarring, so alien, that we both flinched and hid behind a tree. The ordinary world felt like a dream. A park ranger found us a few hours later. We told him a carefully constructed lie. We were campers. There had been a fire, a flash fire, maybe from a faulty camp stove. Our friend, Ben, was lost in the chaos. Our other friend, Leo, had wandered off days ago, mentally unwell. We were disoriented and in shock. The story was thin, full of holes, but our appearance was proof enough that something terrible had happened. They launched a search and rescue for Ben and Leo. They never found them. Officially, they are still listed as missing persons. The massive forest fire was blamed on unusually dry conditions. Life after Blackwood was a quiet, paranoid affair. Maya and I went our separate ways. The shared trauma was too much. Looking at her was like looking into a mirror of my own horror. She moved to a city in the desert, as far from any dense forests as she could get. She stopped taking photographs. The last I heard, she was working as a librarian, surrounded by the quiet, orderly silence of books. I tried to return to a normal life, but it was impossible. The wilderness, once my sanctuary, was now a place of terror. I couldn't look at a mushroom without feeling a jolt of fear. I couldn't see a balloon at a child's birthday party without my heart pounding in my chest. The communion is gone. The voice is silent. But the infection is not. It's dormant. An echo. Most days, I can almost forget. But sometimes, when I'm tired, or when the pressure of a coming storm is in the air, I feel it. A faint resonance at the edge of my senses. I'll see a flicker of impossible color in the corner of my eye. I'll catch a scent on the wind-damp earth and ozone, and for a moment, I'm back in the murmuring valley. And the physical signs remain, if you know where to look. Under the skin on the back of my left hand, there is a faint, web-like pattern of discoloration. It's almost invisible in most light. But sometimes, under the right angle of the sun, it shimmers with a faint, oily iridescence. A permanent souvenir from Payload 14. I live in the city now. I surround myself with concrete and steel, with the noise and chaos of humanity. I tell myself it's a quarantine. That by staying away from the wild places, I am keeping the echo dormant, keeping others safe. But I watch the news, and I worry. A few months ago, a story came out of the Amazon. A team of botanists discovered a new species of orchid that blooms only at night, emitting a faint, bioluminescent purple light. The local tribes refuse to go near it. They say the flowers sing to the mind. Last year, a deep-sea submersible exploring the Mariana Trench captured footage of a bizarre, geometric fungal growth on the sea floor, spreading across the hydrothermal vents. The scientists were baffled. Nothing like it had ever been seen. And every year, there are more and more reports of strange atmospheric phenomena, unexplained auroras at low latitudes, sudden, localized spore blooms that defy meteorological explanation. We called our little group the Blackwood Atmospheric Project. We thought we were studying the atmosphere, but we never considered what might be studying us back. We were so focused on looking up, we never thought about what might be looking down, waiting for a ride. Our weather balloon didn't just collect data. It was a fishing line cast into the highest, thinnest part of our world. And we caught something. Or, more accurately, something caught us. I don't know what the spore's endgame is. Is it a slow, patient conquest, spanning centuries? Are they transforming our world cell by cell, waiting for the day when it is ripe for a full communion? Or are there other pockets of them, other beachheads like Blackwood, growing in the dark, quiet places of the world? This story is a confession. It is a warning. It is the only protocol I have left, to tell people what we found, to let them know that the silence of the wilderness is not always empty. Sometimes, it is simply listening. Ben is gone. Leo is gone. Maya is in hiding. And I am a carrier. An echo of a voice that once spoke with the weight of stars. I live every day with the fear that one day, the echo will become a whisper. And the whisper will become a chorus. And the voice I hear in my own mind will no longer be my own. We are in your blood. We are in your bones. Wherever you go, you carry us with you. The protocol was broken. And now, I can only wait and watch the sky. Thank you for listening. The events I've recounted are a heavy burden, and sharing them is difficult, but necessary. The wilderness holds secrets we are not prepared for, and sometimes, the pursuit of knowledge comes at a cost we cannot comprehend. If you have your own stories of strange encounters, of protocols broken in the deep and silent places of the world, we have a secure link in the description below. We read everything. Stay safe, stay vigilant, and remember to respect the wilderness, because you never know what's waiting just beyond the tree lane. Subscribe for more protocols. And thank you for being here. The lake isn't real. It's a glitch in reality. Hello, and welcome back to the Wilderness Protocol. For those of you who spend your time in the deep woods, you know there are rules. Unspoken, most of them. You learn them through instinct, through the prickling on your skin when the birds go silent, or the sudden, metallic taste in your mouth when you realize you're no longer on the trail. These are the protocols of survival. But there are other protocols. Older ones. The ones the wilderness itself enforces. Rules that have nothing to do with bare safety or finding clean water. They're rules about perception, about reality, and about what happens when you see something you were never meant to see. My name is Alex. I'm a Iwasa cartographer, a map maker. My job was to translate the wild, chaotic truth of the land onto the clean, orderly lines of a map. I dealt in facts, in elevation, longitude, latitude. I believed that everything in this world could be measured, plotted, and understood. I was wrong. I was hired to remap a section of the Blackwood National Park. It was a standard contract, a 5-year update. They fired me after 3 days. They fired me because I mapped the lake. A vast, silent, impossible lake that, according to my own data, according to my own eyes, wasn't there the day before. They told me I was drunk, or incompetent, or lying. They confiscated my equipment, revoked my permits, and told me to never come back. They wanted me to forget what I saw. But you can't forget something like that. You can't unsee a wound in the fabric of the world. So tonight, I'm not just telling you a story. I'm giving you my report, my testimony. This is the protocol they don't want you to know about. This is what happened in Blackwood Park. It all started, as these things often do, with perfect, mundane normalcy. The email arrived on a Tuesday morning. The subject line was simple: cartographic survey contract, Blackwood National Park. For a freelance cartographer like me, it was a dream job. Most of my work was digital, updating suburban developments or verifying property lines for legal disputes. It paid the bills, but my soul craved the wild. I got into this profession because I love the intricate dance between nature and the tools we use to understand it. The satisfying click of a tripod leg locking into place on uneven ground, the hum of the GPS rover connecting to satellites 20,000 kilometers away, the sheer, quiet focus of translating a three-dimensional landscape into a two-dimensional representation. It's a form of communion. Blackwood was legendary. A vast, sprawling expanse of old-growth forest, granite cliffs, and winding rivers that had remained largely untouched for over a century. The existing maps were notoriously unreliable, based on surveys from the 1970s. The Park Service needed a complete overhaul for safety, for conservation, for the simple reason that the Earth is not static. It shifts. It moves. I accepted the contract immediately. The pay was good, and the project length, the full 3-month, meant I could truly immerse myself in the work. 2 weeks later, I was driving my beat-up truck down a long, gravel road, the dense canopy of Blackwood closing in above me like a tunnel. I met the head ranger, a man named Henderson, at the park's main station. He was in his late 50s, with a weathered face that looked like it had been carved from the park's own timber. He had a firm, no-nonsense handshake and eyes that seemed to take in everything without giving anything away. "Alex, good to have you," he said, his voice a low rumble. "The sector we need you to focus on is Quadrant Delta. It's in the northwest. Remote. We've had it closed to the public for a decade. Too many lost hikers, trails washing out. We need a reliable map before we even think of reopening it." He spread an old, yellowed map across the hood of his Ranger vehicle. The paper was soft and worn at the creases. Quadrant Delta was a large, green smear on the page, with only a few tentative contour lines and a single, dotted line indicating a trail that was optimistically labeled Fawn Creek Path. "Your access permit is here," Henderson continued, handing me a laminated card. "You'll have a designated campsite near the quadrant border. Radio in every evening at 1900 hours. Standard procedure. Any questions?" "Just one," I said, pointing to a large, blank area in the middle of the quadrant. "Anything notable in here? Strange rock formations, major clearings, anything not on this old map?" Henderson squinted at the spot I was indicating. He was quiet for a long moment, his jaw working slightly. "That's the low basin," he said finally. "It's dense, marshy in the spring, but should be mostly dry this time of year. Thick undergrowth. Just stick to your grid pattern. The instruments will tell you what's there." There was a strange finality in his tone, a subtle warning to not get creative. I chalked it up to the typical caution of a man responsible for a huge, dangerous piece of land. I was a contractor, an outsider. He just wanted the job done. "Understood," I nodded. "Grid pattern it is." The first day was pure bliss. I set up my base camp, a sturdy canvas tent, my cot, a small cooking station, and a fold-out table for my data logger and laptop. The air was clean and sharp with the scent of pine and damp earth. The only sounds were the wind and the distant call of a raven. This was what I lived for. I spent the afternoon calibrating my equipment. My Trimble R12 IGNSS rover, a state-of-the-art piece of kit that could give me centimeter-level accuracy. My Total Station, a precise laser instrument for measuring angles and distances. And my trusty field tablet, loaded with the old maps and ready to receive the new, far more accurate data points. That evening, at precisely 1900 hours, I radioed Henderson. Base camp established at designated coordinates. Equipment calibrated. Beginning survey of Delta 1 tomorrow at sunrise. "All's well," I reported. His voice came back, crackling with static. "Acknowledged. Stick to the plan, Alex." Henderson out. The sun set, painting the sky in fiery strokes of orange and purple that were visible through the gaps in the canopy. As darkness fell, a profound silence descended on the forest. It wasn't an empty silence. It was a heavy, ancient quiet, filled with the presence of a million sleeping things. I felt a small, primal thrill of being utterly alone, a single point of human consciousness in a vast, indifferent wilderness. I zipped up my tent, turned on my headlamp, and reviewed my plan for the next day, completely unaware that the orderly world I cherished was about to break apart. Day 2 was a cartographer's dream. I woke before the sun, the air cold and crisp. After a quick breakfast of coffee and oatmeal, I shouldered my pack and my rover and headed into Quadrant Delta. My method is systematic. I work in a grid, walking transects, taking readings every 50 meters. The rover beeps, communicates with the satellites, and a new point of data appears on my depleted tiny, digital breadcrumb that, when combined with thousands of others, would form a perfect image of the land. The terrain in Delta 1 was challenging. Steep inclines, thickets of rhododendron that clawed at my clothes, and carpets of moss that concealed treacherous, ankle-twisting roots. But it was honest work. The land was exactly what it should be, a rugged, beautiful mess. By the end of the day, I had mapped a significant section, and the new contours on my tablet were already showing a much more dramatic and complex topography than the old map suggested. That evening's radio call with Henderson was just as brief and professional as the first. I felt a sense of pride in my progress. I was taming the chaos, one data point at a time. Day 3 is the day everything changed. My grid pattern for the day would take me directly through that blank space on the old map, the area Henderson had called the Low Basin. I set off at dawn, just as before. The first few hours were uneventful. The land gradually sloped downwards, as expected. The trees grew taller and more ancient, their massive trunks covered in thick green moss. The air grew still and heavy, the sounds of birds and insects fading away until the only sound was the crunch of my own boots on the forest floor. I remember checking my position on the tablet. I was approaching the center of the basin. According to my survey from the previous day, in the expected topography, I should have been in a relatively flat, densely wooded area, perhaps a little damp underfoot. I pushed through a wall of ferns, expecting more of the same, and stopped dead. The world opened up. Before me, stretching out further than I could see, was a body of water. It wasn't a pond. It wasn't a marsh. It was a lake. A huge, sprawling lake of impossible size, its surface a perfect, black, glassy mirror reflecting the gray, overcast sky. There were no ripples, no birds on its surface, No fish breaking the water. No reeds or cattails along its shore. The forest simply stopped at a clean, sharp line, and the water began. The silence was absolute. My first thought was that I had made a catastrophic error. I must have wandered miles off course. I pulled out my tablet, my heart starting to pound. The GPS signal was strong, locked onto a dozen satellites. A blinking blue dot showed my exact position. And according to the map, I was standing in the middle of a forest. I looked up from the screen to the impossible lake, then back down at the screen. Forest. Lake. Forest. Lake. The blinking dot on my tablet insisted I was surrounded by trees and solid ground. My own two eyes were telling me I was standing on the shore of a body of water larger than any I had seen in the entire park. My rational mind scrambled for an explanation. A flash flood? No. There hadn't been any significant rain in weeks. The shoreline was too clean, too permanent. It wasn't the muddy, debris-strewn edge of a flood. It was a neat, established bank of dark soil and rock. A beaver dam? It would have to be the work of beavers the size of grizzly bears to create a lake this vast. And there was no dam to be seen. I walked to the water's edge. The ground was firm right up to the water line. I knelt and dipped my fingers in. The water was shockingly cold, unnaturally so for the time of year. It felt thick, heavy, like oil. I brought my fingers to my nose. It had no smell, no scent of algae or mud or decay. It smelled of nothing. My training, my entire career, was built on a foundation of trust in my instruments. But the evidence of my senses was undeniable. I was a cartographer. My job was to map what was there. So, I did my job. For the rest of the day, I walked the perimeter of that silent, black lake. It was a grueling task. The shoreline was miles long. I took hundreds of data points, my hands moving with a strange, robotic detachment. With every beep of the rover, a new point appeared on my tablet, slowly, painstakingly outlining the shore of the lake. On my screen, it looked like a glitch, a bizarre collection of data points forming a perfect, impossible shape in the middle of a forest that my previous day's survey had confirmed was there. It was a map of two realities laid on top of one another. When I finally returned to my camp, long after the sun had set, I was exhausted, not just physically, but mentally. The world had tilted on its axis. At 1900 hours, I picked up the radio. My hand was shaking. "Henderson, this is Alex. Come in." "Go ahead, Alex." I took a deep breath. "Henderson, I have a situation here. I'm in Quadrant Delta. My survey today has revealed a significant geographical feature, one that's not on any map." There was a pause. The static on the radio seemed to get louder. "Specify, Alex." "It's a lake, sir," I said, my voice sounding thin and strange to my own ears. "A very large lake. In the center of the low basin. Coordinates are," I rattled off the center point from my tablet. The silence on the other end of the line was long and heavy. I could picture him in the ranger station, frowning at a copy of the old map. "Son," Henderson's voice came back, and the friendly rumble was gone. It was replaced by a hard, cold edge. "There is no lake in the low basin. It's a forested wetland. I've been in and out of this park for 30 years. There is no lake there. With all due respect, sir, I'm looking at my survey data right now. I spent 8 hours walking its perimeter. It's here. I can send you the data file." "There is no lake," he repeated, each word a separate, sharp command. "Let me ask you something, Alex. Have you been drinking?" "What? No, of course not. I'm just reporting what I found. It's my job. Your job is to provide an accurate survey. What you're describing is not accurate. It's impossible. A lake that size doesn't just appear overnight." "Overnight." The word hung in the air between us. "That's the other thing, sir," I said, my voice dropping. Yesterday, my survey grid passed less than 1,000 meters from the edge of where this lake is now. I had clear line of sight through the trees in that direction. There was nothing there. Just more forest. Another dead silence. This one felt different. It felt cold. Frightened. "Pack your things, Alex," Henderson said, his voice flat and devoid of any emotion. "Your contract is terminated. Be at the ranger station at 0800 tomorrow. Bring all the equipment. All of it. Do you understand? Terminated? But why? I just found something. Isn't this exactly why you hired me? To update the maps?" "You're not listening," he snapped. "Your report is nonsensical. It suggests either gross incompetence or that you're under the influence. Either way, you're a liability. We can't have you out there. 0800. Don't be late." Henderson out. The radio went dead. I sat there in the encroaching darkness, the silence of the forest pressing in on me. Fired. Not for making a mistake, but for telling the truth. For mapping what I saw. Henderson's denial was too quick, too absolute. It wasn't just disbelief. It was a command. A command to deny reality. There is no lake. And in that moment, I knew this wasn't about incompetence. This was about a secret. A secret so deep and so terrible that they would rather fire a cartographer than acknowledge it. The lake wasn't just an anomaly. It was forbidden. I looked at the data on my tablet one more time. The beautiful, terrifying outline of the lake I had mapped. A ghost on the machine. They could fire me. They could take my equipment. But they couldn't take my memory. And I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that I had to go back. The drive back to the ranger station the next morning was surreal. The forest, which had felt like a place of peace and discovery just 2 days earlier, now felt menacing. The trees seemed to watch me, their branches like twisted, accusing fingers. The light filtering through the canopy seemed dimmer, sicker. I found Henderson waiting for me by the station, his arms crossed, his face a mask of grim authority. He didn't offer a greeting. He just pointed to a space next to his truck. "Unload everything," he said. Silently, I began to unpack my gear. My rover, my total station, my tripods, my data logger. Each piece of equipment felt like a part of me that I was being forced to surrender. Henderson watched my every move, his eyes like chips of granite. When I got to my personal laptop and my field tablet, he held out his hand. Them too. All data, all files related to the contract. "This is my personal property," I protested, my voice weak. "It was used for Park Service business. It's evidence now. Hand it over, or I'll have the sheriff come and take it." His tone left no room for argument. Defeated, I placed the tablet and laptop on the tailgate of his truck. He picked up the tablet, turned it on, and navigated to my survey files. He found the file from the previous day, the one with the lake. He stared at it for a long moment. I couldn't read his expression. It was a mixture of anger and something else, fear. Then, with a few deliberate taps, he deleted the file. He deleted everything. My transects, my elevation points, my hours of meticulous work. Wiped clean. "Your contract is terminated for breach of conduct and submission of falsified data," he said, handing me a single sheet of paper. It was a termination notice, already filled out. "Your final payment will be mailed to you. You're to be off park grounds in the next 30 minutes. Your access permit is revoked. If you are found within the boundaries of Blackwood National Park again, you will be arrested for trespassing." He didn't look at me as he spoke. He was looking past me, towards the forest. "I didn't falsify anything," I said, my voice shaking with a mixture of rage and desperation. "That lake is real. Why are you doing this?" He finally met my eyes. The coldness in them was absolute. "Some things, son, are better left unmapped. You saw a swamp. You got turned around. That's the end of it. Now get out." I drove away from Blackwood Park in a daze, the termination letter on the passenger seat like a brand of shame. But it wasn't shame I felt. It was a burning, obsessive curiosity. Henderson's reaction, the deliberate erasure of my data, the veiled threats, it was all a massive, blinking sign that pointed to something far stranger than a simple, impossible lake. I didn't go home. I couldn't. I checked into a cheap motel in the nearest town, a dreary little place called Pine Creek. The room smelled of stale smoke and despair, but it had what I needed, a weak Wi-Fi signal. My mind was racing. If the Park Service was covering this up, this couldn't be the first time. A cartographer, a hiker, a ranger, someone else must have seen it. I spent the next 48 hours falling down a rabbit hole of digital archives, old newspaper clippings, and local history forums. I searched for Blackwood Park, disappearances, strange sightings, unexplained phenomena. Most of it was standard fare, Bigfoot stories, ghost lights, tales of hikers getting lost. But then I found it. It was a footnote in a digitized geological survey from 1988. A single, cryptic sentence in the appendix: "Survey of Quadrant Delta suspended due to persistent instrument malfunction and spatial anomalies. See Internal Report BP 1138 for details." BP 1138. It was a designation, a code. I searched for Blackwood Park BP 1138, but found nothing. It was an internal report, likely buried in a dusty filing cabinet in some government basement. Frustrated, I broadened my search. I started looking for former Blackwood Rangers, trying to find anyone who might have worked there in the late 80s. This led me to an online obituary for a man named Alistair Finch, a career ranger who had served at Blackwood from 1975 until his retirement in 1995. The obituary was standard, but a comment left by his daughter mentioned that he was a dedicated archivist of the park's hidden history. She mentioned he kept meticulous journals. On a long shot, a desperate, wild hunch, I found his daughter's social media profile. I crafted the most careful, respectful message I could, introducing myself as a historian interested in the park's development and asking if her father's journals were ever made public. I didn't expect a reply, but a day later, she wrote back. She said her father's journals were just boxes of old notebooks in her attic, but she remembered him talking about his protocol diaries. She said he was always paranoid about them. She thought it was just the rambling of an old man who'd spent too much time alone in the woods. She gave me a P.O. box address and told me if I sent her $100 to cover the cost and effort, she'd copy a few of the relevant years and mail them to me. It felt like a lifetime, but a week later, a thick manila envelope arrived at my motel room. Inside were photocopies of dozens of pages from a worn, leather-bound journal. The handwriting was neat, precise, and filled with a creeping sense of dread. And on the first page I read, I saw the title, The Wilderness Protocol. The journal was a secret, unofficial log of every strange occurrence in Blackwood Park that was never put in an official report. Finch had documented everything. Trails that shifted overnight. Compasses that spun uselessly in specific areas. Reports from hikers who claimed to have lost hours of time, emerging from the woods at dusk when they were certain it was still midday. And then I found the entry that made my blood run cold. October 17, 1988. Called out to Quadrant Delta. The USGS survey team pulled out this morning. Their leader, a geologist named Harris, was white as a sheet. Said all their magnetometers were haywire and their GPS prototypes were giving impossible readings. Said one of his junior surveyors swore he saw a body of water in the low basin. Harris told the kid he was seeing things. They packed up and left within the hour. The official report will read, instrument malfunction. I walked out there myself this afternoon. Kept my distance. From the ridge line, I could see it. The basin isn't a basin anymore. It's full. Water. Black. No reflection. Just a hole in the world. Same as in 76. Same as in 62. The protocol is clear. Rule 1. Acknowledge nothing. The event is not real. The feature does not exist. Rule 2. Cordon off the area. If a reason is needed, cite trail instability or wildlife preservation. Rule 3. Discredit any witnesses. Question their stability, their sobriety, their competence. If they are staff, terminate their contract. If they are civilian, issue a warning for trespassing. Rule 4. Erase any data. Confiscate any evidence. The map must remain unchanged. Rule 5. Wait. It always recedes. The land always heals the scar. But the scar tissue remains. I sat there on the lumpy motel bed, the photocopied pages shaking in my hand. It wasn't just me. It wasn't a hallucination. This had happened before. And the Park Service, for decades, had a procedure for it. A protocol for dealing with a place that breaks the rules of reality. Henderson wasn't just a gruff bureaucrat. He was an enforcer of this protocol. He was protecting the world from a truth it couldn't handle. The lake was a recurring event, a wound that opened and closed on the landscape. And Finch's last line echoed in my head. The land always heals the scar, but the scar tissue remains. What was the scar tissue? What was left behind when the lake vanished? Finch's journal had more. He wrote about local legends, stories from the native tribes who had inhabited the area centuries ago. They spoke of a hungry place, a spot on the earth that would sometimes open its eye and reflect a wrong sky. They said it swallowed a village once, a village that had been built in the basin long before the land was a park. They said the spirits of the villagers were trapped in the wrong sky, and sometimes, if you looked deep into the water, you could see them. That was it. I had to go back. They could arrest me, they could call me crazy, I didn't care. This was no longer about a map. This was about understanding what that place was. I had to see it again. I had to look into its eye, and I had to find out what was inside. Going back wasn't easy. I was a persona non grata. My face was known. I couldn't just drive in through the main gate. I spent 2 days studying the maps I still had in my head, cross-referencing them with satellite imagery on the motel's slow internet. The satellite photos, of course, showed nothing but an unbroken canopy of trees. The official reality. My reality. I found what I was looking for, an old, decommissioned logging road on the far eastern edge of the park, miles away from Quadrant Delta and the ranger station. It was overgrown and likely impassable by vehicle, but it would get me within a day's hike of the low basin. I went to a hardware store and an army surplus store in the next town over. I bought a cheap compass, a basic GPS unit, nothing as fancy as my confiscated rover, a powerful flashlight, waterproof gear, and enough food for 3 days. I was no longer a well-equipped professional. I was a trespasser, an infiltrator. I drove to the old logging road under the cover of darkness, hiding my truck as deep in the brush as I could. As the first pale light of dawn touched the sky, I slipped into the woods. The forest felt different this time. Before, I was there with a purpose, with the sanction of authority. I was an observer. Now, I was an intruder. Every snap of a twig behind me sent a jolt of adrenaline through my veins. I imagined Henderson's grim face appearing from behind a tree, park rangers closing in on me. The paranoia was a physical weight on my shoulders. It was a long, arduous hike. The terrain was brutal, and without my high-tech gear, navigation was a slow, deliberate process of compass checks and landmark sightings. The forest seemed to resist me, its thorns tearing at my clothes, its roots trying to trip me at every step. It was late afternoon when I finally crested the ridge overlooking the low basin. I moved slowly, crawling the last few feet to the edge, my heart pounding in my chest. I peered through the undergrowth, half expecting to see the familiar, dense forest I was supposed to see. But it was still there. The lake. It was just as I remembered it. A vast, silent expanse of black, glassy water. It hadn't receded. If anything, it seemed bigger. Its edge seemed closer to the ridge line than I remembered. I spent the rest of the daylight hours just watching it from my concealed position. I saw no signs of life. No birds flew over it. No animals came to its shore to drink. It was a dead zone, a void in the heart of the teeming, living forest. As the sun began to set, the lake didn't reflect the brilliant colors of the sky. It just seemed to drink the light, the surface remaining a perfect, bottomless black. Finch's journal entry came back to me. It reflects a wrong sky. I made a cold camp on the ridge, no fire, just a sleeping bag pulled tight against the chill. I couldn't sleep. I kept watch over the lake, the faint starlight doing nothing to penetrate its inky surface. A deep, irrational fear began to grow in me. It was the fear that the lake was aware of me, that my presence here was a disturbance, and it was watching me back. Sometime around what must have been 3 a.m., the deepest point of the night, something changed. A soft, faint light began to glow from within the lake. It wasn't a reflection. It was a luminescence, a sickly, pale green-white light, like phosphorescence, but deep, deep down. It started as a single point in the center of the lake, and then slowly, it began to expand, illuminating something in the depths. My breath caught in my throat. I fumbled for the cheap binoculars I bought. I focused them on the glowing water, my hands trembling so badly it was hard to keep the image steady. At first, it was just murky shapes. But as my eyes adjusted, the shapes resolved into definite forms. They were buildings. I could see the sharp, geometric lines of rooftops, the dark, vacant rectangles of windows. And then, rising from the center, a shape that was horribly, undeniably familiar, the spire of a church, its cross tilted at a crooked angle. It was a town, a submerged village, perfectly preserved in the black water. The light seemed to be coming from the windows of the buildings, as if every house had a single, ghostly candle burning within it. Finch's journal. They said it swallowed a village once the spirits of the villagers are trapped in the wrong sky. I was looking at the village. I was looking at the scar tissue. This was what the lake left behind, or perhaps what it was made of. A place that was consumed, stolen from the world, and now existed only within this recurring, watery wound. I stayed there, frozen, watching the ghostly, silent, underwater town until the first hint of dawn began to gray the sky. As the natural light grew, the ethereal glow from the lake faded, and soon it was once again just a featureless, black mirror. I knew what I had to do. Watching from a distance wasn't enough. I had to get closer. I had to touch it. The thought terrified me, but the need to know was stronger. I packed my meager camp and began the careful descent from the ridge down to the impossible shoreline. The air grew colder and damper as I descended towards the lake. The silence became more profound, pressing in on my ears. It felt like the air pressure was changing, as if I were entering a different climate, a different world. When I finally stepped out of the tree lean onto the dark, loamy soil of the bank, the feeling was overwhelming. It was like standing on the edge of space. The lake stretched out before me, vast and utterly still. The black water didn't lap at the shore, it just lay against it, unmoving. I walked along the edge, my boots making soft prints in the damp earth. I was looking for something, anything, that felt real. A piece of driftwood, a washed-up fish, a discarded bottle. There was nothing. The shoreline was sterile, clean, as if it had been created moments ago. My gaze was fixed on the water. Even in the daylight, I felt like if I stared long enough, I could see the faint outlines of the submerged town beneath. Was I imagining it? A trick of the light and my overwrought imagination? I found a spot where a small, rocky promontory jutted out into the water. It offered a better vantage point. I walked out to its edge and knelt down, my face just a few feet from the surface. I stared into my own reflection, but it was wrong. The face that stared back was pale, distorted, the eyes wide with a terror that felt both mine and not mine. The reflection of the sky above was also wrong. The real sky was a uniform gray, but the sky in the water was a deep, bruised purple, with sickly green clouds that seemed to swirl slowly, like oil in water. It reflects a wrong sky. My scientific mind, the cartographer in me, was screaming. This defied physics. This defied optics. This defied everything I knew. And then I saw something else. In the reflection, behind my own distorted face, figures were standing on the shore. Pale, translucent figures, just at the edge of perception. They weren't reflecting anything from the real world. They were in the reflection. They stood motionless, their faces indistinct, all of them turned towards me. The villagers. I scrambled back, my heart hammering against my ribs, and fell hard on the rocks. I looked back at the real shoreline behind me. It was empty. There was no one there. But when I forced myself to look back at the water's surface, the pale figures were still there, in the reflection, watching me. This was a place of ghosts, of echoes. The lake wasn't just water. It was a lens, a window into somewhere else, a place where the drowned town and its people still existed in some terrible, perpetual state. My terror was warring with a desperate, scientific need to understand. I had to have proof. A photograph. A sample. Something I could take away from this place that would prove I wasn't insane. My phone was in my pocket, its camera practically useless but better than nothing. I pulled it out, my fingers clumsy and numb. I opened the camera app and pointed it at the water. On the screen, I could see the reflection clearly. My pale, terrified face. The bruised, purple sky. And the ghostly figures standing on the bank behind me. I pressed the button to take a picture. The phone screen flickered and went black. A camera error message flashed for a second before the device went completely dead. It wouldn't turn back on. The lake, or whatever force governed this place, wouldn't allow itself to be captured. It rejected my attempt to impose order, to create a record. Defeated, I shoved the dead phone back in my pocket. there would be no digital proof. Henderson had known. The protocol was designed around this fact. Discredit the witness, because there will never be any evidence. Only the story. I was about to retreat, to flee back to the safety of the trees, when my eye caught something glinting at the water's edge, half buried in the dark soil. I crawled over to it. It was metal. I dug around it with my fingers, the cold mud seeping into my gloves. I pulled it free. It was a compass. Old, brass, the glass cracked. The needle, instead of pointing north, was spinning slowly, erratically. It was beautifully made, but clearly ancient. And attached to the brass ring at the top was a small, tarnished metal tag. I rubbed the grime off it with my thumb. There were letters stamped into the tag. USGS, 1988, H. Harris. Harris, the geologist from Finch's journal. The one whose junior surveyor had seen the lake. He had been here. He had stood on this exact shore. And he had left this behind. Or dropped it in his haste to flee. This was my proof. Not a photo, not a data file, but a physical object. An artifact from a previous visitation. A piece of another man's terror, left here for me to find over 30 years later. Holding the compass, I felt a strange connection to this Harris, to Finch, to every person who had ever stumbled upon this impossible place and had their reality shattered. We were members of a secret, unwilling club. My fear began to subside, replaced by a cold resolve. I had one last thing to do. I couldn't leave without it. It was irrational, dangerous, stupid, but I had to. I took off my glove. I reached out my hand, my fingers trembling, and I plunged them into the black, silent water of the lake. The cold was instantaneous and absolute. It wasn't the cold of ice water. It was a deeper cold, a fundamental absence of heat that seemed to leach the life right out of my flesh. It shot up my arm and into my chest, and the world dissolved. I was no longer on the shore. I was standing on a cobblestone street. A gray, oppressive mist swirled around my ankles. Above me, the church spire I had seen from the ridge clawed at a perpetually twilight sky. The air was thick with the smell of wet rot and something else to spare. I could hear things. The distant, mournful clang of a church bell. The faint sound of weeping, coming from all directions and none. A woman's voice, whispering a name over and over again. I was in the town, the drowned village. I looked down at my hand. It was pale, translucent, just like the figures I had seen in the reflection. I tried to pull it back, but I couldn't feel my arm. I was caught between two worlds, one foot on the shore of Blackwood Park, and my hand plunged into another reality. A figure emerged from the mist in front of me. A small child, a girl in a simple, old-fashioned dress. Her face was a pale, sad blur. She looked at me, her eyes wide and empty. She held out a hand to me. I felt a pull, a gentle but insistent tug on my arm, trying to draw me deeper into the water, into her world. The whispered voices grew louder, beckoning. They weren't malicious. They were just lonely. So terribly, eternally lonely. They wanted company. The cartographer in me, the man who believed in a logical, measurable world, was gone. All that was left was a primal instinct to survive. With a surge of pure, animal panic, I screamed. I threw my entire body weight backward, away from the water, wrenching my arm free with a sound like tearing fabric. I landed hard on my back on the rocks, gasping, my heart trying to beat its way out of my chest. My hand was numb, blue, and felt like it belonged to someone else. The world of the misty, cobblestone street was gone. I was back on the shore, but the lake was no longer still. The surface was boiling, not with heat, but with a thick, black churning. The ghostly figures in the reflection were gone, and the entire body of water seemed to be contracting, pulling in on itself. The shoreline was receding, gaining a foot of dark, muddy ground every second. The lake was vanishing. My intrusion, my touch, had triggered its retreat. I didn't wait to watch. I scrambled to my feet, clutching the old compass, and I ran. I ran without looking back, plunging into the forest, not caring about the path, just putting as much distance as I could between myself and that unholy place. I ran until my lungs burned and my legs gave out, collapsing at the base of an ancient pine tree, safe in the embrace of the real, solid, understandable woods. The lake was gone, but I knew, with a terrifying certainty, that it would be back. I made it out of the park. I don't remember much of the hike back to my truck. I was running on pure adrenaline and fear. I drove for 12 hours straight, not stopping until I was in another state, hundreds of miles away from Blackwood. It's been 6 months since that day. My career as a cartographer is over. My hand, the one I put in the lake, is permanently numb. It's always cold to the touch, and sometimes, in the dead of night, I get phantom pains, like the chill of that water is still seeping into my bones. The doctors have no explanation. I never contacted the park service again. What would I say? I have no proof that would hold up. Just a story. And an old, broken compass that now sits on my desk, its needle forever spinning, a constant reminder of a place that breaks the laws of physics. I tried to find more information about H. Harris, the geologist. I found a brief mention of him in a university newsletter. He took an early retirement shortly after the 1988 survey, citing personal health reasons. He died a few years later. I wonder if he ever told anyone what he saw. I wonder if he, too, was haunted by the wrong sky. Sometimes, late at night, I pull up satellite images of Blackwood National Park. I zoom in on Quadrant Delta on the low basin. I see nothing but trees. A dense, unbroken forest. The official map remains unchanged. The official reality holds firm. But I know what's there, or what's not there. I know that beneath the soil, the scar tissue remains. The drowned village is waiting for the wound in the world to open once more. They fired me because I mapped a truth they have spent decades trying to suppress. They have a protocol for dealing with reality when it frays at the edges. A protocol of denial and silence and erasure. But reality doesn't care about protocols. The wilderness has its own rules. There are places in this world that are not meant to be measured, not meant to be mapped. They are deep, dark, and hungry, and sometimes they open an eye just to see who is looking back. I looked back, and I don't think it ever looked away. Thank you for listening. The world is older and stranger than we can possibly imagine. Stay safe out there. And if you're ever in the wild, and you see something that shouldn't be there, maybe it's best to pretend you didn't. If this story resonated with you, and you want to explore more of the unexplained phenomena that hide in the forgotten corners of our world, please consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel. It helps us continue to bring these accounts to light. And if you have your own story, your own encounter with the impossible, share it in the comments below. You are not alone. Until next time, stay vigilant.